We're going to begin with Doc Rivers, who made his debut in a loss at Denver on Monday. They fell to the Nugs, held them to 113 points, though, which actually represents progress because the Bucks had been giving up 120 points. Avery, let's start with you here. Highly unusual to make a change of this nature in the middle of the season. Only David Blatt had a record as good as Adrian Griffin and lost his job midseason. You know both guys. You know Adrian Griffin and Doc Rivers. What did you make of this? Were you surprised?
I was totally surprised, especially with a team that's 30-13, third best record in the NBA, second best record in the Eastern Conference. I was fired December 27th, 2012. I'll never forget it. It's my wife's birthday. So I was
fired no.
Yeah. I was
happy birthday.
Oh my God.
I was coach of the month in November, got fired on my wife's birthday in December. Brooke Lopez got hurt, and we went from having an 11-4 record to a 500 record. So it's a terrible feeling. And I think I had 2 weeks where I didn't even walk outside because I was in shock. So I can only imagine Adrian Griffin being in total shock, especially with the record that they have. Most of the time, and I know even in my situation, this is not an organizational firing. This is a player's firing. Something went wrong, especially with the top 2 players on the team. That's my opinion.
It's interesting you bring that up because as we know, Giannis was a big part of getting Adrian Griffin to the team in the first place. He vouched for him. He was very much involved with the process of figuring out who the next coach of the Milwaukee Bucks was going to be. And then months later, now you have Doc Rivers. So it's interesting to hear you say that. But I think a lot of us were concerned or confused rather by the choice, right? Doc Rivers, defensive guy. We know this. Doc Rivers also has a championship with the big 3 of the Boston Celtics, that historic big 3. We know that. But we also know he hasn't seen that success since. Multiple 3-1 leads that have been blown, a losing win percentage when it comes to clinching series for some of the other teams, for some of the other series that he's been on. So I guess the question is for me, was defense and being a player's coach, I know we love that term in the NBA, does that supersede the fact that when it comes to winning championships, he hasn't done that since? Like, what weighs more in the eyes of an organization, in the eyes of a player?
Well, I know Bill Reiter wasn't really excited about this hiring.
He was not.
only because I think postseason success is important. But that's the only concern I have, Coach.
Yeah, but Bill, my question to you would be, was this an organizational firing?
So it's funny you say that because I was going to ask you the same thing. So my guess, and it is a guess, is that this was the players got Adrian Griffin fired. I think that's because it's 2 things, right? Griffin gets fired, then they got to hire somebody. I suspect, but I don't know, that Doc Rivers might have managed beyond the front office in Milwaukee, maybe directly to ownership. Yes, I think the players got Griffin fired.
Players, Bill, or player? Player?
No, I think it's
player. Singular guy.
Let's be clear. When we're talking players, we're talking stars and the people that influence those stars. And there are a couple stars minimum. And in that locker room, there are probably at least 3 guys, Middleton included, who think they're stars. Maybe he is.
Oh, whoa.
So they got fired. There's not a shot fired. But in terms of who's being listened to by the front office, it's 2 or 3 guys. And Coach, I want to ask you this. I don't want to put you on the spot, or maybe I do a little, because you're right. I'm not a huge Doc guy, but that is not a universal view. He's a divisive figure, and people feel very passionately on both sides of the equation. What has struck me as interesting in conversations with people, look, the Doc haters are going to tell me how ridiculous this is, but some of the people that I know who like Doc and who, like Doc, have had their eyebrows go up when talking about the fact that he replaced Adrian Griffin. Do you think this is a betrayal by Doc Rivers because he was supposed to be an advisor, or is it just all in the game and Adrian getting fired is a totally separate issue than Doc Rivers, his advisor, taking his gig?
Allegedly an advisor.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I can tell you, look, I reported this here. The Bucks said that he wasn't an official advisor, then admitted they met together in Vegas. So, I mean, he was.
Why I said allegedly.
He was certainly involved.
Well, I like something that Ashley said. You guys talked about it. Doc Rivers was available before they hired Adrian Griffin. Now, he was deep in the discussions, I know, with the Phoenix Suns. So, the decision to hire Adrian Griffin, they're saying that was a mistake, obviously, because if you didn't even give him a year, you gave him 43 games. But
yeah,
I would say with Doc Rivers, it's kind of the same argument, and I know this is not a football conversation. So was Dan Campbell a better coach in the first half against the 49ers and a bad coach in the second half? Doc Rivers,
he had too much dip on his chip, coach, in the second half. That's what happened.
Right. But if you've been up 3-1 that many times in your career in 3-2, I'm just going to look at it glass half full. Players still have to make plays, Bill, in those situations. I was up 2-0 in the finals in 2006 to Miami. We lost 3 straight games in Miami and came back and lost at home. So, I was coach of the year those first 2 games, and then I got out-coached the next 4. I just think it's give and take between players and coaches. James Harden didn't make plays for him down the stretch, had a horrible game in game 7, missed free throws. So I think, yes, he's been up in quite a few series, and I know as a coach, you got to figure out how to push the right buttons, but I also believe players got to make plays.
I think it really says a lot about how we evaluate coaches that we're in this situation now, because the NBA, as we know, there's so many stats, right? In the analytics era, they can measure everything. They measure how far guys run, every stat under the sun. With coaches, it's not really like that, right, Avery? I mean, like, you've got ATOs and slobs, and we heard Doc the other night after they lost. He goes, my ATOs are pretty good. But beyond that, we don't have a lot of ways to evaluate coaches and how good they are beyond their record, right? I mean, I had in a previous life a conversation with Steve Kerr about this, and he was really insightful about it. And he said he almost thinks about his job more as like a soccer manager, because yes, there are X's and O's. You are going to draw up certain plays, but in the flow of the game, players basically know what they're doing, what they want to try to execute. And it's really more about like managing personalities, which is why, when Bill and Ashley are talking about an organizational firing, that's kind of like, it's so nebulous, right? I mean, it's hard to put your finger on what happened with Adrian Griffin beyond they just didn't want Adrian Griffin anymore.
But I think my pushback to that is, yes, I think obviously the way that you can evaluate a player is drastically different than a coach. A coach, it really is wins and losses and how the locker room responds to him, right? That's really your only threshold, and adjustments and things like that. But I wonder, like, where is the line? Because I feel like Doc Rivers has had success, but he's also had failures in where it means the most. And that is in terms of playoff wins, series wins, and championships. So where's the line in terms of how you gauge whether or not this is a coach you want or you trust leading your organization when it comes to the stretch of the season, when it comes to the ultimate goal, which is hoisting a trophy and putting a championship ring on your finger? How many times do you have to kind of see the same scenario play out with different organizations to say, okay, it's not a player thing, it's a Doc Rivers thing? I think that's the biggest question.
In Doc's case, multiple times is the answer, Coach. I mean, like that. And you're right, players have to make plays, but Doc Rivers' track record, which is the thing that we can measure, it's not great. And I would let me offer this. We're all operating under the assumption that good decisions are made for basketball reasons. And I'll just say that the politics of what happens behind the scenes, the ability for people, Doc Rivers included, to manage up with power brokers, those things have as much bearing on who gets hired and who doesn't, especially who gets hired, as whether or not you're the right candidate. It's not whether you're the right candidate. It's can you convince the one guy who's deciding you're the right candidate.
Yeah, and when coaches are hired, you're hired for a reason, because ownership think you're going to solve a problem. All right, Milwaukee hired Doc Rivers because they want to solve problems, whatever is communication, defense, organization, a better assistant coaching staff. And then the measurables are, fairly or unfairly, are you going to win the championship? Doc Rivers is walking into a situation where it's a ready-made team. He's not walking into the Detroit Pistons situation or a young San Antonio Spurs. This is a ready-made team. Similar to Philadelphia, they were ready to go. Boston, not so much. You remember with Boston, they weren't very good until they made the trade for Ray Allen and Kevin Garnett. So again, all things are on the table. If the Milwaukee Bucks do not make it to the NBA Finals this year with a chance to win the championship, this will be a season of failure for the Milwaukee Bucks and also Doc Rivers. That's just the facts.
All right, before we move on to some of these other teams that might be contenders in the East, Avery would put you on the spot. I mean, they move out one of your guys for another one of your guys. Is Doc the missing piece? Are they now all of a sudden like bigger, better contenders now that they've made this switch?
No, I'm still all over Boston. I think Boston, independent of their record, they're the most complete team in basketball. Roster, size, versatility, shooting, basketball IQ, star players, much improved coaching staff with the addition of a guy like a Sam Cassell. Joe Mazzulla has more experience now, solid front office, home court advantage. So I'm still all over the Celtics.
Yeah, unfortunately I am too. And like last night, right? They put up 81 in the first half. They look like they're cruising. And then all of a sudden, Indiana Pacers come back, hit them in the mouth a little bit, but they didn't fold. They end up winning that game. They are the most complete team in basketball.